Hello, everybody. We will get started in just a few moments.
Excellent.
I could get everyone to mark their attendance on our awesome agenda for today. That'd be groovy. If you have any opens you want to discuss, please hack them into a document. We'll get started in about a minute. Oh man, David's hanging outside today.
I know.
Rainy and crappy here. I can't do that.
Are you in Seattle?
I'm not
it's
in
raining.
Seattle.
It's raining and crappy in Portland. So, yeah.
My goal is to make everyone else jealous. So
we need to find a more empathetic goal, my friend.
No, you can everyone come over to here to my house. We can all sit out on the deck and do computer things.
Well.
All right, folks, it is 2 after the hour. Welcome to the May 18th edition of the OpenSSF Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group, aka the best working group. We are post that link to the agenda one time. If you have the opportunity, please mark your attendance. If you have any opens. My proposal today, before we get too far into things, is to do a recap of the Open Source Summit dose. But please feel free to write any opens you might have. As is tradition here, do we have any new friends that wanted to say hello and introduce themselves to the group?
Not quite new, but I'm a second timer. It's been about a month and a half since I've joined, but I'm hoping to be back and listening in and gleaning some good information.
Excellent.
And I'm in Denver. It's supposed to snow this weekend. So for those of you who are rainy and sunny, I'm jealous.
Very nice. Anyone else, first or second timer, wanted to say hello?
I should. Myself, Cliff Perry, work for Red Hat PSET. I've been meaning to join this and I keep forgetting. So first time here and I'm going to listen and learn.
Excellent. Welcome, Cliff. You're not in San Francisco, though.
No. Oh, I'm in the UK. There you are.
Anyone else want to say, introduce themselves? All right. Do I have anyone that be willing to help out and scribe notes with us today? Or hands making work? Thank you, Vicky.
I would like some assistance, but definitely do my bit.
Right. All right. Let us talk about the Open Source Summit 2. I posted a link to the security mobilization plan. All would like to gaze upon that. David, since you were there for both days, could you just give us a brief recap of kind of what the meeting was about, what happened, and then I can fill in some details here and there?
I can try. So I will try to give a quick recap, and Crow will explain I was completely wrong and start over. So, all right. So I honestly don't know how many people know the context. So let me start from the top. Not the true top. In January, the White House, U.S. White House had a meeting where basically, hey, we're concerned about open source software security. Who else cares? They contacted a bunch of companies, and almost all of them said, oh yeah, I mean it's an important topic. I mean, open source is widely used. We don't want to kill it. We just want to make sure it's secure for all the uses it has now. And they contacted all these companies, and all these companies said, yes, we totally agree. And there's this group called OpenSSF that we're all working together on. So the White House said, great. There was a readout of 3 goals from the overall meeting, which I thought was actually an impressive summary. How do you summarize a long meeting with 3 bullets? I thought that was pretty good, actually. Of course, everyone's busy, but more recently, hey, we need to have a follow-up, otherwise things will languish. So a number of folks basically tried to make a first cut at turning those very high-level 3 goals into more specific actions. After various discussions, it's decided to turn into what's called 10 streams. Where each of the goals has multiple streams. You can find that document posted. Okay. My thanks to the number of folks who were involved in little working groups trying to create each of those 10 streams. I mean, there are a lot of folks involved in this. And Brian and I, just to give you kind of inside baseball here, Brian and I had a 10-hour Zoom call trying to take each of the individual 10 pieces and trying to make it look like it was one whole thing, without removing the important information, but make it look like it was written by a single group, which, making consistency is hard, but especially while trying to not remove the good stuff. I think it's been well accepted. We've been pitching this as a 0.9.1. I mean, it hasn't gotten, the meeting was basically an opportunity this is a draft created by some people. Not everybody has seen it or reviewed it, but that's okay. This is a starting point. This is a draft. What do you think? And so the meeting was basically a number of folks, some of them involved in a number weren't, basically commenting on it. Does this make sense? Does it not? Where is it missing? And so the goal at this point is to say, here's a draft. Some folks put together, let's try to fix it, improve it, make notes, make changes. One particular I will note, for example, I led the education stream. Thank you. Although we had mentioned college, universities, and boot camps, we never talked about K through 12. Oh, okay, that's an interesting thought. Probably not so much K, but maybe near 12. So, so I think there were some interesting comments, and I think the longer term goal is to, try to turn these ideas into both funding and action. All right, Crow, tell me everything I got wrong.
Oh, you did very well. And it was a meeting of U.S. public sector folks and people from industry. A couple sessions I was in, it was a pretty good dialogue. Unfortunately, we got rat-holed on the whole high school thing in the education group, and we didn't get to talk about the actual content. But that's a future problem for another working group. That's my favorite. So my intention today is I sent an email out to the list in hopes folks would have a chance to review the document. So I wanted to start talking about the mobilization plan, if anyone had any thoughts, and I would like to zero in on the streams 5 and 6, if possible, because those seem most related to this particular working group, and kind of see what interest this group has to participate in further refinement of those 2 areas in particular. But if you had suggestions, we'll take them for any stream. So has anyone had a chance to read the doc yet? And what did you think, Vicki? Anne?
It was a hell of a good consolidation of the working documents, which were many, many, many pages long. And so I was really impressed by how well they were able to, really shrink that down. But I haven't gotten into any more detail than that because it's, been quite occupied. But yeah, I think it's a good start. I'm interested in hearing what people had to say at the meeting about funding options and action items going forward. Like, what are going to be next steps to make all of this happen? Because I know that was something, whenever I bring it up to others, and I have brought this up to others in other communities since then, And as a result, there are a lot of new meetings on my calendar to try and fill people in on what's going on in OpenSSF. And they all ask about the money aspect, which is interesting, but is what it is. So just to be prepared to answer their questions, aside from saying, go to the working groups and talk to them, which hasn't happened yet, but I would like to prepare them with more information on that. So that's a question I keep getting.
So, and to provide some context to what Vicky was talking about, each of the streams put together a proposal, like we would like to do X, Y, and Z, and they put together a suggested budget for this is the things we need, generally people and people's time, and that came down to some dollar figures. And that's where kind of the next step is that Dave is referring to, is now that we have this plan, it's kind of generally cohesive, we need to get the red pen out and start to review, are these proposals valid? Are they things that we think will improve the open source security? And are they things that we are interested in trying to help evangelize and participate in? And then the funding aspect of it is, I believe the intention is that as member organizations find projects that they're interested in, they potentially, once the plans are more solid, that they potentially could pledge money to help out the scanning, the vulnerability scanning project, for example. They might donate some engineers' time or some tools to help out. But that's, we need to vet the idea, are these ideas valid? And are we interested and able to participate, or try to encourage some other people to take up those banners? Anyone else have a chance to read the document yet or have thoughts on it?
Crope, I'm mostly impressed that you still have a printer.
It's an awesome printer.
Yeah. I guess in general clarification, a lot of these work streams do map to working groups. Is kind of to Vicky's question, like, what is the operating model of how we start getting stuff done here? Is the intention that these streams do need to nest under an OpenSSF work group, and the work group is the owner for, kind of the accountable group for that? Or, as you were saying, Crope, it kind of made me wonder if there's a stream where a relevant work group disagrees, does that work stream continue? I'm just trying to kind of map how operationally we make these things happen.
My intention is, being that I'm involved in a few working groups, I feel there are direct correlations between several of the streams and those working groups. So my suggestion is going to be, and for this group in particular, I would like this group to review stream 5 and 6. And do we feel that those are efforts appropriate and within our wheelhouse to participate in? And if so, we potentially could adopt those streams as up at the TAC, we're juggling around with some of the names, but they would become a special interest group, a body of work that this group and other people could participate in, but it would be this group potentially could be the mothership or parts of those streams, or just we would potentially participate in. We don't necessarily need to own it, but for example, if the stream 6, which is predominantly scanning and fuzzing, that's probably going to be a lot of alpha and omega. Well, maybe some of us go help out with those efforts. Or there's pieces, like in particular the CVD guides, which I feel this group can contribute and finalize and evangelize to help further the vulnerability discovery efforts. Any other thoughts on the matter? Or did I answer your question first off?
You did. Yes. Come back to more questions, but you did. Just for what it's worth, I feel like this group should be heavily involved in 5, if not the owner, only because it would be very at odds to have an OpenSSF incident response team that was not in lockstep with the vulnerability disclosure working group. I don't want to take us too far off the rails, but David, is what Krob described the working model for the other work streams as well? Is that the intention across the board?
Hold up, let's see here. It seems like such a simple question. So the goal 1 was to figure out what needs to be done. Okay. Goal 2 is to figure out how that gets done. And to be fair, we were intentionally a little coy about the how, because we were trying to not completely kill a this should be done, just because we weren't sure necessarily how. Now, of course, the reality is that I think everybody who worked on it was, or I think every worker was part of OpenSSF and so on. So we're not unaware. So I think the expectation is the vast majority of these will end up. Well, I'll speak for me. I can't speak for Brian, but because we're focused. Yeah, I'll be honest. We were much more focused on get this document in good shape and out the door for what it was supposed to do. But I think, at least for me, the intended next step is where there's an obvious working group, make it part of the working group's process. Now, that said, I expect that there'll be changes both in terms of when people look at it, they'll say, "Oh, wait, yes, but it needs some changes." Great. I mean, it's a draft. That's fine. Of course, it may very well be wow, we're not doing that at all. Maybe we need to spin up something else. I think for at least one of those, it's not, we may need to end up spinning up a whole new OpenSSF either working group or something like that. But we didn't want to. So my expectation is those that are relevant to a working group or some other or a special interest or a SIF or something within the OpenSSF will end up in those. And if there's just nothing that maps, then we'll either a working group will say, yeah, we're interested, or we'll spin up something else. Or now here's the weird thing. We actually, this may seem strange, we were really focused on what needs to be done. Some of the things may not be OpenSSF work at all. In particular, there are some actions that make more sense for public organizations. And by that I mean governments. And although this was a meeting with the White House, this is not a US only thing. We very much want this to be international. So if the US, some of these things, really governments are the obvious actor there. And so for them, I mean, the OpenSSF can pitch, but in the end, it's governments who have to make that decision. So sorry for the long answer for what should have been, what was a short question.
And for example, to load onto David's point, in the education group, one of our goals is to influence academic curriculums. We won't be able to do that alone. So we will need to have some liaisons and relationships with things like the Department of Education, the U.S. Governors Association. There's a lot of different entities where we need to work with and try to help drive some of these desired changes.
And just to point on that particular point, because unfortunately I am familiar with this, if you're dealing with colleges and they're talking about accreditation, you're talking primarily about ACM and IEEE. I have beat my forehead bloody trying to get them. I mean, some of you may be familiar with this story already. My apologies for the repeat, but after 10 years working with some of those, I managed to get them to add the word security as something that might be important. Not any content, mind you, just that security might be important. And that was the extent of their willingness to consider security as relevant to computing curricula. So I kind of got tired. But that's I'd like to think, however, today is a different day, and that there'll be more of an appetite to actually address the problem as opposed to ignore it.
Can you imagine if you'd gone to like an engineering board and been like, hey, we want to make sure that the engineers build bridges that don't collapse? and they've been like, no.
Not only can I imagine, I actually have an engineering degree. My undergraduate's in engineering, and the complete and utter disconnect from the engineering world, from the software world, which is doing engineering. Because if you're solving human problems with limited resources, that's engineering. And the fact that they don't understand that they're engineering is a real problem. So yes, I think it's a crying shame. I'd like to think the world has changed a little. I think we've got a lot of folks who think software is only math and doesn't affect any people. So we're going to have to overcome the computers are math agenda and start, and start adjusting some thinking.
If you
So
want
any
somebody to back
other-
you up on that conversation, I'm happy to give me a ring and I'll come join you.
Thank you. It's been frustrating.
So any additional thoughts today about the open source software security mobilization plan and the summit? Vicky?
I think I'm with everyone who's had a look at this or heard about this, that I'm very eager to figure out next steps. And I guess, what is the next step to figure out next steps, right? Obviously getting everyone to have a look at the document would be great.
You're my straight woman. You're setting me up.
High
So-
five, teamwork.
I tried to get people to do pre-homework. Obviously, I had limited success in that. So everyone on this call, and I will send a note to the mailing list and in Slack, your homework for our next call is to skim the whole document, but I would like this group's feedback on streams 5 and 6. Do we feel these are things this group has some affinity for or some ownership potentially? And is this something we are passionate about working? And if so, what will most likely happen is if we have enough people that are part of our regular working group, they feel that this is valuable and it belongs here, we'll probably set up a separate series of calls and a special interest group dedicated towards those things. And I think at least initially, because we're going to need to, there's a lot of work to actually trim and refine because there were a lot of ideas thrown out. We'll probably be meeting at least weekly for some period of time, this potentially smaller group, and then reporting back into the full working group periodically. Does that sound like a fun and exciting thing to do? All right, thank you. I appreciate everybody.
Yeah.
I think it's a big opportunity. I think there's a lot of big things, and if you note other areas within the document, so something like in stream 2 or 10 that you feel we need to at least keep tabs on or participate in, let me know. But this will probably require a little more investment in time than our bi-weekly calls as we want to move this forward. David, you had your hand?
Yeah, if I can just, it's not long. It's a couple pages. It won't take you long to read. It's and a lot of this is you'll look and say, oh yeah, but hopefully it'll be, hopefully I think there's some additional refinements and some ideas, and I'm looking forward to more refinements as we go along. And the link is in our notes.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention to that matter. Before we move on to our CVD guide, I just wanted to put a shout out to the Austin conferences that are going on for the Linux Security Conference and the Open Source Summit North America. Will be held in Austin the week of June 20th. If you haven't already signed up to go, I would encourage you to consider it. I believe they are offering hybrid options. Any of us here in the Brady Bunch little display will be there and presenting and doing stuff. So I think it's going to be very good. And it'll probably potentially give us a chance to maybe have a out of conference meeting to maybe work through some items we need to whiteboard on or something. All right, so let us talk about the CVD guidance for security researchers, our current active little project, which we're not going to be able to call it a project anymore.
I just pinged Madison. Neither of us have made any progress on the document ourselves. So we need to grab some time on each other's calendar and continue to work on that.
You can see what David and I got wrapped up in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was traveling last week and haven't had a chance to look at it. So I should have more time coming up, hopefully.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Is
Has
it now a
anyone?
SIG? Is it now a SIG?
They're changing the terms, and it's not. Project is being reserved for like a foundation level thing or code.
Code, right? But this is
And-
neither code nor nor that level, so it's
Yes.
a SIG, I think.
Yeah, it'll be part of a SIG, kind of like the great MFA giveaway or distribution would have been a SIG.
Okay, that's fine.
Vicky.
I started to have a look at it and kind of poke about and see what's what. I added a whole bunch of suggestions and edits. I got about third or half away down through it. And I had hoped to swing back around in the last couple days, but life. But yeah, making progress on just generally editing that and asking a whole bunch of questions in there. So, and this is coming from somebody who, unlike, Madison or Jonathan or yourself, while I'm highly knowledgeable, I am not a specialist in security. So I think asking some of those questions that y'all might just take for granted could be very useful as far as being able to communicate between different groups.
You could be our point of view character
Yay.
that introduces the concept to the audience.
Yeah, I think that's great because not everyone that reads this is going to have any kind of security background either. So that's perfect.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. And I know the open source side incredibly well. And, am highly conversant on the security. And so being able to translate a little bit, I think might be helpful. I'm trying anyway. So
You're doing a great job. We appreciate it all.
thanks,
David.
man.
Yeah, I just realized that in fact we skipped one bullet that I had added, so if we could sneak back to that before we go. But I just realized, but let's finish the CVD discussion first.
Yeah. Did anyone else have any thoughts, commentary they wanted to do? I would encourage you in your spare time when you're not reading a document to throw your eyeballs on the CVD guide so that we can get this moving forward. I think it's in a very good state. I'm very happy with the collaboration so far. But let's see what we can do to help make it even better. So any additional thoughts before we jump back to David's item? All right. I will pause this for a moment and yield the floor back to David.
Okay, just real quick, there's a bullet note about significant argument discussions going on OSS security mailing list about vulnerability disclosures in general. I'm not sure I can easily summarize that, but it is absolutely relevant to this working group. It's basically a very spirited disagreement on what is appropriate roles for vulnerability disclosures. The very quick, overly simplistic summary is the Linux kernel developers really can't do things in private very long, and since it's supposed to run on a vast number of different hardware, they really have to get fixes out. So their process has been general, fix the vulnerability. A bug is a bug is a bug, and just not note that's a security problem. The Linux distros folks don't. That's not how they work. Vulnerabilities are considered very distinct. And as soon as you reveal the fix, you've essentially revealed the vulnerability. So I mean, there are reasonable points. I don't have a simple summary, but um, I would suggest taking a look at some of the arguments there, because I think this is a microcosm of a broader issue of as soon as you release the patch, whether or not you revealed it, attackers really do read commit lines, and some of them will create attacks from it. On the other hand, it doesn't. There's a lot of folks who just their way of attack is they download Metasploit, which they might be able to spell, and for that crew, not revealing the details is helpful. So it's a complicated. There are points on all sides, but I think it's relevant very much for this group.
Can
Go
I
ahead, Cliff.
just maybe give a counterpoint to that, David? I think that I believe this working group, though, is more about the smaller projects and trying to give them good advice rather than maybe very large, well-established projects. And we can disagree with the kernel, and we often do, but we also work within their rules.
What's the subject line for this email? Oh, thank you. Oh, as a security Linux so it's not in the vulnerability working groups email.
No,
it's
this
not.
is one of the mature lists that has evolved around Linux.
Well,
around
okay,
for a
wait,
long
wait,
time.
yeah, careful. The Linux distros is not part of the Linux kernel. That is actually run by Solar Designer.
OSS security, I meant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Not the
OSS
distros
security.
list.
Right. But OSS security has been around for decades. Linux distros has been around not quite as long, but almost, but quite for a long
Close.
time. Same group. Yeah. Same organizers, Solar Designer, and and so.
The link is now in the there's a link
Yeah,
in
the link's
the
in. Yeah, I put the link
perfect,
in there.
thank you. That helps.
Yep. And I could link to individual emails, but there's so many messages, and of course they can add. I wish I could sort by just the subject, but I didn't find a link for that.
So
anyway,
Vicky,
go ahead.
So a lot of us don't have the time or cycles to follow various Linux and LKML type lists. So would it be possible, David, or anyone else who's on the list, after things kind of simmer down a bit, to get someone from the Linux kernel dev community to come and summarize that and kind of coordinate with us? Or is that a bridge too far at this point?
I mean, it'd be possible, but I do want to clarify. This is not a summary of the Linux kernel. This is the Linux kernel developers disagreeing with the Linux distro mailing list. Those are two different groups with very little overlap. Okay, Linux distros. Greg KH is one of the few kernel developers who's also on that list. But in general, these are not the same groups at all. Linux distros is primarily for, well, we got three groups: OSS security, Linux distros, and the Linux kernel developers. Those are three different groups. Okay, and Linux distros, for the most part, does not include kernel developers. That is, it has some, but it's
Yes.
mostly the developers of distributions of Linux
Right.
operating system, i.e. Ubuntu, Red Hat, and so on. Okay, yes, they absolutely do have kernel developers on there, but the interest of this is one of the challenges. The interest of Linux distros, see, there are different houses. There are different interests and incentives. There we go. There are different incentives for the Linux kernel developers and Linux distros, and this leads to complications. There we go.
So, Anne, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I was super quickly trying to jump around and get the gist of what's going on here. Is a good summary to say, abstract things away from the kernel, because special community, special things, policies. Is this really about a group of distributors of an open source project as part of their managed services or distros that they're doing, are having a hard time with the upstream's embargo policies or their disclosure policies. Is that the tension here?
Yeah, there's a disagreement in
Yeah.
process and timing and procedure, which has existed forever.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
I was gonna say, I was thinking about, is the value here that I don't think we're gonna change the kernel, but so is the value maybe we think about, are there other open source projects? I know when we were going through the embargo section in the CVD guide, for example, that was a really tough area about, on one hand, it's not, if the maintainers are doing something that doesn't work for the distros, well, it's not really their problem. And this is where things start getting very fuzzy very quickly. So maybe that is the more abstract discussion we should focus on rather than trying to jump into any sort of kernel mailing list, run, duck, hide.
Well, I guess the other question that I have is like, what was the process beforehand? So the process beforehand is the kernel vulnerability comes up and then it gets handed to the distro developers privately, or is it just go public immediately as soon as as soon as the kernel developers fix it?
It depends.
Yeah, this is way more complicated. Very much depends on who is it reported to. If the vulnerability is reported to the Linux kernel developers, which is actually fairly common, their general process, and I think this has evolved over time, but their general process today is they do their best to fix it. The fix is public. The fact that it's a vulnerability is not disclosed ever.
But
And
the kernel team never, they don't even get a CV assigned for the kernel vulnerability.
they have a policy in general. We do not produce CVEs, and MITRE basically at this point has, for the most part, decided not to have CVEs for the kernel. And there is
What?
this is not new. This is a long term, and there are actual reasons for this.
Wow.
We can go into this later, but no, in general, kernel vulnerabilities are never given CVEs. There are kernel vulnerabilities that get CVEs, but it's not through the kernel. And we can talk about this. So let me not get sidetracked because that's a related but not the same discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
I have had some involvement in something like about this, and I know that there's a subject matter expert on the phone call right now.
Oh,
So
please.
potentially, we could ask the subject matter expert to, if they could, maybe our next call, come in and just do a real quick explanation of how a very large, very mature, very publicly visible community kind of handles this. And I think we're not going to be able to change the kernel security team's behavior. But we can learn from it and be able to share that as part of our good practices. We're advocating, saying this is something that can happen. This is an example of how a community operates, and talk about how downstream consumers like the distros need to understand and kind of work within the rules of that community.
I think this is worth a whole separate discussion, but Jonathan, let me to greatly and ridiculously oversimplify. Part of the challenge is that installing a new kernel is a big challenge. For a lot of cell phones, it never happens. If it happens, we're talking maybe they're hoping to reduce it from 3 months, but usually 6 months or a year or 2 years or never are not at all unusual. So as soon as it gets publicly noted, it's going to be exploited. There will be no actual fix for consumers who are using the software. So noting and reporting a CVE is the same as enabling exploits, because there will never be a repair and update to the actual deployed software. If you think that's a problem, there's a large number of people who agree with you. And Greg KH has been busting his tail trying to get the time between a kernel release and deployment down. I think he's gotten it down on Samsung to, I think, 3 months, which is an incredible accomplishment, because it used to be measured in years. So But this is part of the challenge, is that updating applications for most systems is a lot easier than updating kernels. A lot of folks are not prepared to update them at all. And again, if you think that's a bad idea, I agree with you.
Vicky.
I really appreciate and respect how you did not out the subject matter expert and allow them to stand up for themselves and raise their own hand. So thank you very much for doing that, Crow. Yay. This is one of the reasons why apparently this is the best working group. So I do want to give them the chance to raise their hand and pipe up though, either in chat or otherwise. It is you? No?
Well,
Okay.
I've worked with Crow for several
doppelganger.
years. And I still work in Red Hat's PSET. I mean, it's what I've been doing for the past 6.5, 7 years. Is I coordinate our disclosures and work with our peers and across open source projects and CERT and Vince and everything else. And it's a big ball of mess for all the distros to have to monitor so many places and sources of data.
This
But-
is really valuable information that I think most people aren't aware of, just how complex it can be to do this sort of stuff. Is that what you were kind of referring to, Crow? Having Cliff do a presentation on this?
And where I debate Mr. Wheeler, there are many people on the distros mailing lists that are employed by a commercial open source provider that actively are both kernel maintainers, contributors, and many of which are members of the kernel security team.
Mhm.
So potentially we could ask Cliff if maybe somebody in that capacity, or Clifford himself, might be willing to kind of give us just a high level explanation of how the flow of things. And then we can maybe learn from that and figure out a way how we can provide some advice, because the kernel is one very large mature security group. You have the Apache security team. You have Kubernetes and OpenStack. You have these very big kind of monolithic security teams that all have their own little nuances, and they don't operate exactly the same. And that's very different when you have professional security people on staff, like those orgs, versus a small mom and pop student project or whatever it might be.
I would
Different set of
love
capabilities.
that. And especially I would love to have that recorded like these meetings are. So we can have it available and, chop that video up and just be able to present that to people, because I have a number of team members who are quite early on in their careers and they're completely unfamiliar with how any of this works. And having a resource like that, where I can at least give them some context for all the moving parts, or at least the biggest moving parts, right? Because I know there's a lot of teensy little ones, and give them some context will help them understand just what we're dealing with here. So I'm not going to volunteer Cliff himself, but just the concept of this, yes, please, this would be beautiful.
And I think we could work out a generic workflow, so we're not giving out any private processes or names or whatnot, but we could provide a generic workflow. This is kind of how things work, how the avenues data can come in for a large mature community.
And something that we are Red Hat is looking at is something called the IRP, the Incident Response Playbook or Plan. Like, how do we handle vulnerability management at scale? It's something that we are looking to maybe also share. I don't know if this is the right community, but like something that we're looking at in conjunction. And so this aligns quite well with other things. I have lots of experience, but there's also a larger team of experts potentially. I can take the desire of Crow, but probably like ask around internally, see what makes sense
If you could, that'd be great. Somebody like Pater or anyone else kind of in that role, if they were interested in just kind of talking about this. We'll have to see about recording again, because there are certain sensitivities around these groups processes, and I don't want to speak on their behalf because I'm not a member of that community.
The other part for me as well is that, like, yes, we have friction with the Linux kernel, but we do consider them our partners still.
Mhm.
And it is, we present our opinion, they present their opinion, we often disagree, but we then work together.
And it's,
and
there's
it's like,
different perspectives and missions. The
Yeah.
kernel is a very complex project, an ecosystem unto itself, and they are concerned at a different level. Their set of concerns is different than a commercial supplier.
so
It's not without the interesting moments, but in general, it's worked fairly well for the last 2.5 decades.
How do they handle like Project Zero that comes in with, hey, we've got a 90-day disclosure deadline, and we'll be publicly disclosing this at that point, whether or not you're ready or not.
That is another interesting topic that I am not at liberty to share without those parties. It's a thing that exists that many different communities and vendors have to work with. So in general, GPZ does their thing. They are sometimes can be negotiated with on their timelines if you can demonstrate that something can't be done within their deadlines. But it's not just because you don't want to hit a date. Generally, isn't a very good reason for GPZ to extend your embargo time. Again, I can't speak on behalf of them and their practices and how a community like Kernel reacts to that. Because I'm not on that team. I'm not their spokesperson.
Yeah, I will personally say that I think normally it's in the best interest for people to be honest with each other and have good communications. Also, though, to respect the person who is disclosing the vulnerability to you under embargo, because you want to keep that relationship and have them provide you future ones.
Yeah, vulnerability disclosure is a gift. They are trying to help make your software better, regardless of what circumstances or personalities might be. All right. Well, that was an exciting addition from
Thanks,
Mr.
David.
Weaver.
Thank you.
Didn't mean to lob a bomb, but I thought it would be wise for this group to be aware. I don't think we can change other people's policies necessarily, but I think at least being aware of them. I also, Jonathan, for your amusement, I posted the Linux kernel's CVE policy for you to click on and
Thank you.
be amused by.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I'm noticing a certain amount of delicateness by which both of you or anybody who's been involved in the Linux community seems to articulate themselves around this particular topic. Is there? I presume that it's a charged topic with a lot of like egos and personalities and issues that like have caused explosions in the past that are prompting that, or
like any group of creative people, they are very passionate.
Right.
And the one, if I can convey nothing else, two things to understand about working vulnerabilities in open source is everything is based off of your reputation, your professionalism, how you conduct yourself, how well you work with the people you're disclosing to. And then as a former supplier of software, understanding what the rules of the community you're working in are and following them so that they continue to work with you. And then also understanding and respecting the researcher when somebody's reporting something to you, understanding kind of what the constraints are there so that you can work positively towards reducing that risk for the end consumers, kind of the goal for everybody in the process. But yeah, it's there are some amazingly smart people, and sometimes some people have disagreements, like every family does. But we love each other. We just might not always agree over Thanksgiving dinner.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, but this is definitely a charged topic, and it's not without cause either. I mean, there are some really different incentives and issues and problems for different parties. It's not we're not talking stupid people not thinking about it. It's it's very much a very different incentives and many and beliefs about what is the right thing to do.
And just different perspectives and missions. The kernel developers are developing software. That's their job. Their job isn't tech support, so to speak. They are less sensitive to those concerns. They're focused on making sure the software works correctly, adding new features and capabilities. All right.
I think a lot of people are surprised by the CVE process, though. I don't think Jonathan's the only one. So
I've read it.
Yep, me too.
Conversations with lots of those people over the years. Any other thoughts on this? Would this be valuable for the group to kind of listen if we could put together some kind of high-level overview of how the large communities deal with this type of stuff? Okay, so that sounds good. So I'll see if I can work with my brother Clifford and see what we could share. And all right. Now that we're close to the top of the hour, does anyone have any additional thoughts on the 3 items we talked about today, or any new items they'd like to discuss or bring up for a future meeting?
I don't have anything about what we just discussed, but stretching back a ways, Vince is now open source.
Hey.
Oh,
Yes. It was out on Friday, I believe. So just wanted to make the note. So that's all, because that had come up a long while back here. So now it's finally done and out. So
I was actually debating with Mr. Friedman about that on last Friday, and he said there's some news coming. Like, oh, thank you for sharing, Eric.
How hard is it to launch? Like how difficult is it to actually get an instance running?
I don't know how to answer that. Actually, I haven't tried myself to spin one up outside of our version, because that's
open source, but good luck getting it booted.
So
well, I don't know. It maybe
Yeah.
it's easy, but I just haven't tried. I'm not.
Right.
I didn't develop it myself. Emily did most of that work on our end, and so she would be the one to ask. I can try to ask her for you if you want, or you could just try. I'm not sure. Maybe
Yeah, I might give it a try. Yeah.
If you had any
congratulations.
links or details, Eric, if you could post that into the meeting notes. This is a topic of great interest.
I have
Sure.
it right here.
Having kind of a neutral platform to share vulnerabilities. This might be something that this group could be interested in participating and maybe contributing some code and patches.
Yeah, let me try. Jonathan said that he's got it going.
I just posted in the it's in the
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. That takes care of that then. Sure, yeah, and as always, happy to chat about that as much as I can. I just wanted to make everyone aware, since that was something we talked about previously.
You'll run CodeQL against it and see what it finds.
Vince might have popped up in the old plan, maybe. All right, thank you. So I would also, so as another bit of homework, I would encourage this group to go take a look at Vince out on GitHub and share your thoughts. And I think this is potentially a platform that we may be able to endorse as a good practice, encourage OSS communities and projects to maybe leverage.
Great, and I'm happy to be the conduit the best I can between this group here and us and Emily, and working on it further as needed. But also there's, I believe, the usual pathways available to add to, suggest, et cetera, et cetera. So
Maybe could we ask if Emily had some time, if this time is convenient for her, to come and do a future call and maybe give a demo for us?
Yeah, that seems totally feasible. I can't speak for her, but I don't see why she would say no. So I can easily ask her and try to convey back to you guys, or I guess maybe if you could let me know. I mean, you had mentioned potentially next time talking about other stuff with Clifford and stuff like that. So if you want to let me know when a target would be, I can easily convey that to her and it should be amenable, but again, her schedule pending, of course.
Maybe June 15th.
Yeah, okay, let me ask her and I can report back next time that probably that's fine. If not, I'll let you know what the adjustment would be then, and we can move from there.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. I think this is a
Yeah,
big
sure thing.
move. It's going to be very helpful.
Okay, great. I will ping her now and then get back to you when I can.
Awesome. And so any final thoughts in our last few minutes?
I have a question, Crow. Can you do me a favor, please? Can you please invite me explicitly to these meetings so that I get it added as a thing that I get notified against? Is that possible? Can I get added to the invite list?
I can talk to Jory. Are you part of the mail? I think it goes up to the
I'm part of the mailing list, but I'm not. I don't have an explicit I'm not on the invite list, so I don't get like a do you want or will you be attending, and also it doesn't show up as a notification, so I'd have to duplicate it, which is annoying. So if I can get added explicitly, that'd be appreciated.
Jonathan, I had to duplicate all the things. It is annoying, especially when something cancels or moves it.
Right. It looks like there's a way, like there's 28 guests on the invite list. So how do I get myself into those list of guests?
Let me ping Jory, the admin, and see if she can give us some assistance with that.
Yeah, that'd be greatly appreciated. If you could just like invite whoever's on the mailing list, that'd be cool, because like then being on the mailing list would add you to the invite.
Computers are hard, Jonathan.
Yeah, I know. A man can dream, though. A man can dream.
The nuances of email and calendaring systems. But like Vicky, I have copied the entry from Google Calendar over to my corporate calendar. But yeah, I will ask Jory about that as soon as I hop off this call. Anything else today, team? All right. I want to thank you all for your time and attention. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the mobilization plan and our continued efforts on the CVD guide for researchers. So thanks all. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.